Welcome to Go For Side Effects. I'm your host, Kevin Simon. You all know my lovely co-host, John. How are you doing?
I'm doing good.
I didn't say one damn thing about your bald head tonight until just now.
You just did.
And tonight we got Kirk Love, another Army veteran. And Kirk, I'm really sorry that the Navy's going to whoop the Army's ass in the football game that's coming up. I believe it's December the 7th, I believe.
I got to write that down.
But actually, the Navy doesn't look that good this year. But, Kirk, I thank you for getting hold of me and coming on and wanting to talk to me. We talked for a little while, and I know you've done a lot of good things for the vets back in the early 90s. But go ahead and tell a little bit about yourself and where you were at during Desert Storm.
Well, I was in Germany, part of 7th Corps at that time. We were guard duty. It was cold. It was blowing. And the sergeant turned to me and said, we're going to Iraq. And I looked at him like, what do you mean going to Iraq? We're not going anywhere. Next thing you know, the next week we were railheading the equipment. We were loading up. We were getting everything ready. I was like, oh, God, this is real. Then on top of all that, I was a staff duty driver down there for the battalion. So I would drive down and bring back pouches, things that nature. And in some of it, I would, of course, peruse some of it. And one of them I got to see was the casualty reports, projections for my unit. And it was 76% in the first 8 seconds of the assault. We were supposed to, our unit was going to be wiped out. So I called back to the States and told everybody goodbye, that we weren't coming back. And the intelligence cut the phone off, because they realized I was talking about things I had seen already, and I already had a good idea just how bad this was going to go. And we landed in Saudi Arabia with plenty of time before the show kicked off. We're trying to drill and practice, and to me it was insane, because the sergeant would yell at me, "Now you run over there, hide behind that tree." And I'm like, tree? What tree? There's no trees out here. And I would argue with the sergeant, why are we training like this when it's sand, desert, there's nothing to hide behind? It's going to be that way during the war. So I was stunned at everything, what was happening. I got to load hundreds of body bags into the trucks. I saw that it wasn't going to be a fair fight. They were going to use chemical weapons and wipe us out. And so it was a nightmare. And we're a signal battalion, so we're going to be up behind the forward observers. They're going to fire over us. And so all they did when the war did finally kick off for us is they just sent us out front to draw fire. And so our unit zigged and zagged in between all these tank defenses and these other situations. And there was finally one night during the 100-hour battle where we just sat there. We had driven for 30 minutes out ahead of the entire division, single file out into the dark. And then when we came to a stop, I didn't know what was going to happen. I was told the kid next to me, this is going to be bad. This is going to be really bad. We're not where we're supposed to be. And so you grab all your stuff. I'm going to grab all my stuff. We're going to jump out the truck. And we're going to run back to the troops, because there's no way they're going to let us drive back. Everything's going to be blown away. And sure enough, we had been sitting in front of a tank battalion, an Iraqi tank battalion. And here comes the artillery behind us. Here comes all this stuff. And they start firing over us and picking everything off in front of us. And it was one of many times during the battles where all we could do was watch everything that was happening around us. And to me, the war was a nightmare, because I was powerless the whole time, start to finish, waiting to die. Months of waiting to die. It was going to be a chemical this, blah, blah, that. And then the battle itself was just, everywhere we got sent were all these weird, crazy things, that just watching people blow up. And it's not like in the movies where, there's a lot of huge fireball and all that. Most everything I saw was just poof, little cloud of smoke, and that was somebody just died. And the smell, a lot of different things that happened during that. There were others that got to fight the war. I had to just drive and watch the war. And it finally, at its crescendo, while things were going, I can't take it anymore, and I fall asleep at the wheel. And it's only just for a little brief time. I wake up, everybody's gone. And I realized, oh my God, I'm lost out in the middle of Iraq now. And so I drove for 30 minutes trying to find anyone, just wide out. And everybody's following me from behind. They don't realize that we're lost. And I finally roll up on the battalion and find them during the battle and follow them the rest of the way in. But it was just, there were so many close calls all the time. We're driving through our own minefields. We were driving through all kinds of crazy stuff. And then when the war was over and we survived it, I'm like, what the hell was that? And, I don't know if you remember, but when they declared the ceasefire, we were pissed. We came there to kill Saddam. We didn't come there to give up. We were nowhere near it. We turned around and went back into Kuwait. And so I remember listening for an hour after the ceasefire, everybody firing everything they had left at the Iraqis.
I remember that.
Oh yeah. So I was like, I'm all for it. Let's kill these sons of bitches. And so the war to me was incredibly frustrating because all that build up, we're gonna die. I don't die. And then we set up shop in Kuwait, and they start blowing everything up. The next thing I know, I'm standing out there at the edge of the camp. Oh, boom! This demolition goes off, looked like a nuclear bomb. And it turns out later on, I found out it was one of the largest demolitions ever done since World War II. And this thing burned for 2 days, this giant complex that burned. It was not Kamasea.
I was going to ask you, was that Kamasea? And you're saying no.
Oh, Kamasea was way the hell north of us. This was smack dab between the 1st and 3rd AD. And I watched this thing burn, multiple colored smoke, and all this spalding material shooting out of the complex, and the smoke rolled across us. And I found out later that the 256 alarms had gone off so much they turned them off. And I'm like, so rather than tell us the truth, they just turned everything off and said, if you make it, you make it. And years later, I tried to explain that to the Pentagon, what happened to that complex. And they never addressed it throughout the years, even though they even have a document. They call it the Kirk Love document in there at Osagwe, where I explain what happened to our unit, and it's in between the 1st and 3rd AD. If they had addressed this chemical munitions dump in between us, it had made Kamasea look like child's play. And so I know that there are lies involved in there. There were a lot of things that I saw. There's a lot of things that I took pictures of. When I got back to Germany, they confiscated my film. They confiscated all 15 rolls of film that I shot in Iraq. And they basically just blew off anything and everything I tried to tell people. And so it was a real sore point with me because it wasn't a real war.
Yeah, and here's where I want to stop you just for a second, Kirk. 2 things. Okay, first off, there's a reason why I didn't join the Army, because he said 8 seconds, 76% death rate. Hell no. That's why I didn't join the Army. Marines, neither way. No, that's why I went Navy. But what I do want to touch on is that even us Navy guys, we did not understand why we didn't finish the job we were out there to do. We were pissed along with y'all. We should have went in and destroyed Saddam and finished it right then and there. And that, I heard, was the UAE didn't want us to go all the way in.
Well, there were a lot of things about it that was confusing, including the Bedouins. A lot of the people that we were dealing with out there, they were nonviolent. They didn't know anything. They were struggling. And I, after a certain point, started helping anyone and everyone that I could. And people would write to me from the States, and they would say, is there anything I could do to help you? And you guys set up in Kuwait. And I'd write back to folks and said, I don't really need anything myself, but these Iraqi children, they're innocent in all this. They don't know anything. They're starving to death. And I would get these hostile, angry, hateful letters back. how dare you aid the enemy? You scum, blah, 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 blah. And I'm like, I was stunned at the reaction to it because people could not see what we could see while we were there. And it was a disaster. I knew it was a disaster because the only people fighting the war were the Republican Guard, the dedicated Republican Guard, Saddam and his guys up north of us. But everybody in Kuwait and down that way, they wanted no part of it. And so it wasn't ugly in the sense that, get out Americans then. They didn't treat us that way back then. But it made you hate it even more because, like, we were leaving Saddam there to start it all over again, or kill these innocent people, or destroy more lives over nothing, when we should have just gone in.
I never did understand. I understand it's a political deal why we left and didn't go and, as you say, and finish the job at. I think that's been a frustrating point to a lot of people because, like you said, then later on down the road, then we spend 20 years in the region, and it's like,
well, he killed 100. He killed 100-something thousand people after we left.
Right.
Oh, it was a lot more than that.
Well, right. Well, I think they reported 185,000, but
he completely turned on his own people. And keep in mind, they did things like they had all, not just chemical bunkers and chemical storage, they had fermenters, all these tanks, these large tanks filled with anthrax that they were going to use on us. Well, when they lost, they just dumped it out in the open, and this anthrax plume went through and just killed everything downwind of it. And if you don't remember back then, there were tens of thousands of dead animals everywhere. They weren't shot. They weren't hit. They weren't ran over. They weren't blown up. They just laid down and died. And a lot of people didn't understand it was the anthrax. And there were people that died right along with them. If anything, one of the haunting things I remember was very lively in Saudi Arabia. You cross the border and it's deadly silent. Nothing moves, no sound, no nothing anywhere. All the animals are gone because they had eaten them. They'd shot and killed and moved everything that was gone. It was a wasteland. Everything about that region is a wasteland, and it was terrible for everybody involved because it was just, there was no point to any of it. The way that this all was going. And it drove me crazy because I couldn't understand why these people were going to let him keep doing this. But then I found out later that we had 9 nuclear incidents in Iraq, 9 of them, not just one, 9 of them. They knew that when they blew up these reactors, these systems for making the uranium, that they were going to vent. The Air Force guys said, we should not be doing this. We shouldn't crack these cases on these things because the Shamal winds are going to carry it downwind towards the troops. And that's exactly what happened. Guess who told me that one?
Who?
Kaplan from the Presidential Special Oversight Board. He and his buddies are standing in the hallway outside during the session when I went to go talk to a presidential committee in D.C. These guys knew what happened. They knew about all these different incidents that took place, and they're there to cover it up. And so was the senator at that time, Warren Rudman. And I got real chummy and real buddy with a whole bunch of the members, including Bill Taylor and Vin Cam. And they were going to turn on the committee and turn state's evidence and upend the whole show. Well, damn Resource Center stepped in. Pat Eddington screwed everything up. The story went out incomplete. Bill Taylor and Vin Cam were asked to resign from the committee, and all this stuff disappeared, and it all went away. And I got in an article in the AAAS Science magazine about the Pentagon, but in the end, we had a chance to get that information out. It was one of 144,000 incidents that happened in Iraq, in that region. It was a disaster. There were so many things that went wrong. And there's dozens of directions I went and tried to find out, to the point where I spent the last 26 years data mining and searching and writing 1,000 some odd FOIAs to the Pentagon and others, trying to find out what all did happen in there. And the alarming thing for me, Office of Special Assistant Gulf War Illness, Mike Kilpatrick and all these others, they gave me information all the time. There were only two of us that got all this information. There was Jim Brown years ago, who got in there early in 96, and they gave him a bunch of stuff. And then I turned around and I got a bunch of things out of them, forced it out of them. But they volunteered information in private with me at meetings at the Pentagon. And then afterwards, they wouldn't talk about it. They wouldn't say a word. They wouldn't divulge anything. And I confronted them all over Capitol Hill. And Mike Kilpatrick backed away from me. It was bizarre. I was at the center of this fight at the highest levels of this country. I mean, you'd be surprised who stepped in, who was involved in this, and especially in the intelligence community and others. And it got to the point where I had a Mexican standoff with the Pentagon, and I finally confronted them, and I said, look, will you grant me immunity from prosecution if I turn classified material? And General Vesser said no. So basically he was saying, you turn up with one classified document, you're just going to jail. And so I was going to end up being the first Snowden at that time. I said, hell no, and I backed away. So I've had a Mexican standoff with the Pentagon for 26 years now, trying to get information released that they refuse to. Old Barack Obama steps in, changes the law. Instead of classification being 30 years, now it's 50 years. And so the stuff that happened in the Gulf War will not be out in our lifetime. And everything that was supposed to be released at the 30-year mark has been reclassified. And of all that information that's out there, the Pentagon told me that there were 6.5 million records related to the war, 21 million total, of which 1.7 million, it states on the OSAGWA website, 1.7 million are medically relevant, which means there's information that will help people with their claims. Of all that's out there, only 44,000 files have been released to the public. And if the Gulf War went smooth, why is 99.9% of it still classified 30 years later? It didn't go well.
That's a good point.
Well, you mentioned medical claims, where we asked you a short time ago about the PACT Act and what your personal feelings are towards that.
Well, the people that fought to get the PACT Act, that worked with Jon Stewart, they were trying to save themselves. And so that's from 2003 to present. And so that's the way they geared it. They didn't set out to be malicious about this, but I told all these people way back at the very beginning, you don't have a complete program here. You don't understand how this is going to work. It's filled with loopholes and it's going to backfire. No one listened to me. They went forward with it. They made it happen. And then I finally said in November 2022, look, people, this law is not going to work. There are so many problems, so many flaws with it, that finally I confronted down here in Texas. And I told them, this is not going to work. And sure enough, when I went to file and try to use the PACT Act, it did nothing for me. It offers nothing. For Gulf War veterans like ourselves, 1990, 91, there's nothing that ties back to it. Every bit of it is set to 2003 to present, and it punishes us. And so when I went to regional office and I fought them, several times with several people trying to get something done, in the end, nothing. I couldn't put any of it in my claim because there was no way to tie it to the claim. In the end, the only thing I could do was get my back injury upgraded, which they didn't do a proper job on that either. So I did get a rating increase, but it had nothing to do with the PACT Act. I challenged the PACT Act in the Waco Tribune Herald here in Waco, and I told them it has loopholes, that it wasn't going to work. And a year later, there are going to be tens of thousands of rejection letters and people that are going to be blown off. And so I tried to get it into a Stars and Stripes article. It sort of made it in there a little bit, but the guy that wrote the story, he ended up editing it down, and he didn't do me any favors in the long run. I tried to go after it, and then after that article went out, the rest of the media around here, I went on a campaign trying to get them to talk to me. And I even had it said on the back of my van, I have a sign shop of my own, and I made my own sign on the back, said, the PACT Act failed me, and the Secretary of VA, Dennis McDonald, knows it. Wow. And I went everywhere taking pictures with that, confronting, trying to get it addressed. And all the TV stations, news crews, newspapers, everybody around here would not touch me. And I used to be all over the news. I'm sorry.
No, I'm going to touch on that because I have written over and over and over to all these news stations, all of them, about, hey, y'all need to talk to Desert Storm vets. Y'all need to really know what the truth is, what's going on with us, because what they're telling us one thing, but another thing is happening. They talk a great game, but now that game, it's almost like a checkmate. We lost.
Well, it's a money thing, really, truthfully. The wealthy, the corporations that control the media, Gannett, all these others, Scripps, all of them have decided that they're not going to let hardship veteran stories out anymore. They're going to censor us, and they're not even going to let us write letters to the editor anymore. And so I've been in this bloodbath fight where I've openly accused these TV stations, the newspaper, the Clean Daily Herald here at Fort Hood. I've gone after these people and told them, you're trying to censor me. You're trying to censor a story that's actually relevant. And they wouldn't offer an explanation or anything. They were just like, look, you're limited to 250 words in a letter to the editor. And I'm like, 250 words? You can't say anything in that. And that's not a letter to the editor if I'm aware of it. But I've come to realize now that American media has cut the veteran out of the story. They've shut down everybody. Even Jon Stewart, when he did the Warhorse Symposium a little while back, I was so angry at him. I had gone to great lengths to get in there and promote it. And then I found they wouldn't let me ask questions. They wouldn't let me speak. And when he got on there and he had a chance to confront the Secretary of VA, he wimped out. He didn't want to jeopardize the PACT Act. He didn't want to jeopardize his baby. So he went soft, and they basically gutted him. And so Jon Stewart right now meant well, but his hands are tied. All these different people that used to be on our side, their hands are tied. And the media who used to write stories won't talk to us anymore because they're busy sucking up to the government, to their new landlords, and saying, we're not going to jeopardize our funding. We're not going to jeopardize our operation. So we're just going to write poof. And that's exactly what they do. They write garbage now. So I was the last person to get a semi-hostile interview into Stars and Stripes. And after that, they've just cut Gulf War vets out of this, and they're just trying to say everything's fine. But it's not just them. It's the House and the Senate. I went to all over the House and Senate, and when I was up in September, and in the old days, years ago, they would at least let you walk in and sit down and talk with a staffer, and you could address some of your problems. Not this time. They said, no, we don't do walk-ins anymore. So I'm like, what the hell? So basically, I spent weeks with Bernie Sanders' staff trying to get an appointment scheduled so we can come in and talk to them. They wouldn't return my calls or emails. They were trying to avoid me. I showed up in his room up there, and his staff was like, sorry, no, we just can't do this unless it's scheduled. I said, you wouldn't schedule it, and I told you on the phone you wouldn't schedule it. You blew me off. So I wrote in Bernie Sanders' little guest book over there, you suck, Bernie. You were there in '98 with us at the CDC. You made us promises that you were going to help us, and now you betrayed us. You become a bean counter. And so all these people that used to help us in the House and the Senate, I mean, they're gone. They've cut our throats. The House Veteran Affairs Committee, they don't want to talk to anybody. They don't answer phones. COVID made it wonderful for them. We don't have to talk to you anymore. We don't have to acknowledge your email. You got a problem, unless you're wealthy and part of the Military Family Alliance, we don't have to talk to you. And so it's a wall now all across D.C. And when I went to that RAC meeting, September 2023, just a little while ago, it was a definite eye-opener. Ed Bryan and myself, we've been running together for years. We ran with Venus and Denise and all these others. And he and I went all over the Hill kind of getting a fresh feel for it. And it's just basically closed doors now. And the worst part of all this, I finally confront the Secretary of VA. I'm standing out in front of VA headquarters, and he gets out of his little black vehicle, and there's the Secret Service escorting him in. He actually walks up to me and Ed, because we were standing outside, we're alone, you could tell we were veterans, and he approaches us. I confront him. I confront him about my former committee. I even show him the original paperwork and the original bag I used to carry for that committee, and that we don't have a healthcare and benefits any type of soapbox to talk on. So he tries to put on a show like, oh well, I'm here now, I'm talking to you now, and I'll put your name in my cell phone. Here's your name, here's your phone number, and I'm thinking to myself, he's going to delete that about 30 minutes later. He's not even serious. And sure enough, here it is, November. I have not heard a word from him. And the real answer was right there in front of me before he even approached us. I'm looking up at this giant 40-foot flag hanging off the front of the headquarters. This is 810 Vermont Street. This is the VA headquarters that I've been going to since the 90s. And the flag out front is faded and torn and shredded. And I'm like, really? With the budget you guys got, you don't have the money to put at least a decent flag out in front? And I kind of said to Ed at that moment, that was the answer right there. I was hanging out in front of the headquarters. It's not what it was.
Oh, no. And I agree with you. I mean, what's really funny is that, like, when we go into the VA and we talk to them and we want, to ask questions about, they don't know much about Desert Storm. They don't, I mean, you mentioned Desert Storm, them doctors are like, what the hell war was that? But this.
Well, you got the issue right there, attrition. And that is the people that used to know something about it in 96, 98, and 2002, they've all been driven away. There's no one that can stay at VA very long anymore. The people is there now, it's a job. I walked in, I started 2 years ago. I know nothing. They didn't teach me anything. I don't have to know anything. I'm just going to stay here for a little bit and then move on. And so the attitude with environmental health and VA, with ORD, with all these different branches internally is we don't have to worry because no one's going to be around long enough to even remember anything. And so I'm part of the dinosaurs in this crowd. I'm part of that was there at the beginning. I saw the people that cared be driven away. I saw, to me, one of the greatest people in there was Helen Molaskowitz. She was the senior coordinator in environmental health back in 1999, that she was overseeing all these programs for our registries, the risk referral, all these different things. She was in charge. And she spoke out against the Presidential Special Oversight Board, and she and I formed a friendship. Throughout the years, she would sneak me internal documents, records, spreadsheets. She would sneak anything out of VA and give it to me because she knew that her bosses were betraying her. Well, in 2008, I didn't know she was dying of cancer, and I was on my committee. There's a picture of me and her at that point during that last meeting, and that was the last time I would see her. I didn't know that she died shortly after that. No one said anything. No one acknowledged her, and they didn't replace her either. They didn't replace her with someone memorable. You had Steve Sloan and Aaron Schneiderberg and all these others in there that couldn't wait for everything to go silent. They don't want anyone to know anything. So what we have now left over at the highest levels is a handful of legacy government personnel that we can't get rid of. The House and the Senate knows we've got to find a way to start getting rid of these old timers with these grudges. And nobody coming up through the ranks that's going to make it because they're going to make sure no one can get through. So it's a closed loop system. And people that care. Here in Texas, I had the best coordinator down here at Temple. She really wanted to do her job. Betty Aguilar, she was fantastic. And I showed her everything over a 2-year period, my dealings with the Secretary of VA. And I even emailed her back in September, the photo of me and the Secretary. She got the biggest laugh out of it because she knew that for 2 years I'd been going after him and I was going to make good on it.
Let me ask you this, Kurt. So going way back, I asked you about the PAC day, but I guess we never asked you about, when you got out of the Gulf. So we're going way back in time here. When you got out of the Gulf because of where you were at and how close you were, what was some of the things that you first encountered, or you knew things were an issue with your well-being?
Well, the first telltale clue in Germany was the rapid weight gain. There was something wrong, and I could not keep the weight off for anything. I knew
really?
At that point, Oh yeah, rapid weight gain is a sign of sarin exposure. It has a lot to do with the cholinesterase inhibitors, enzymes, body function. Everything is thrown into a kilter, and your body rebels by pouring on the lipids and getting rid of the sugars and other elements. Blah blah blah. But the weird thing is, it took years for it to really kick in, to really slowly degenerate. And then in 1994, I was pretty sure I was going to die. It exacerbated. I was in blinding internal pain. Eating food was like eating broken glass. Drinking water was like battery acid. Everything hurt. I was screaming in the hospital. The doctors couldn't help me. No one understood what was happening.
It even hurt for you when you drank water, huh?
Oh, everything was horrible. I was at that point, I couldn't sleep at night. I may be getting an hour or 2 hours sleep at night. It was just a screaming, howling sound in my ears. I just couldn't rest. I was in blinding pain all the time. And it just, finally, I lost everything, lost my home. I was living at this guy's house. And I told the guy, I said, when I die, you just get all my stuff. And you just throw my body out in the backyard and you get all the stuff. And we waited basically for me to die for about a year and a half. And it was slow going. It was horrible. I couldn't get any answers. And then by accident, somebody told me about spring tonic and powdered sulfur with, what was it, castor oil? Well, I didn't want to do the castor oil, but I did the powdered sulfur, and I was eating a teaspoon of it a day. And all of a sudden, powdered sulfur, it turns out it's an antibiotic. And they use it for treating a variety of internal conditions in veterinary science. And so what I was doing at that point is I was treating some type of intestinal infection, some type of GI tract infection, because, the pain dropped by half. I got to where I could start eating again. I could start drinking again. I was starting to get more functional. I was sleeping more at night. And I realized I was treating something. Within 6 months, I was semi-functional again. But it was no thanks to VA, no thanks to anyone else. And then after that, there were all these new problems that started that didn't make any sense. And I went to VA.
Hold on. So you're saying you took powdered sulfur. So where is it that you gained that information on that was what you needed to do to help you out?
I ran into a veterinary nurse who told me of a remedy they use for animals that helped with some of the conditions I was describing. It wasn't a VA doctor. It wasn't anybody normal. It was a veterinarian. Well, and that's what's insulting.
John's going through something similar. That's why you caught his attention. You should have saw his eyes when you said that.
Yeah. Well, so Kurt, I'm going to bounce around a little bit because this is curious. So you were, I'll come back to it, but I'm curious, where in Germany were you stationed?
I was in a little town called Ansbach. It's down by Nuremberg.
I was in Karlsruhe, and then we deployed from Wild Flicking. So did you guys leave everything in the desert? Did you guys deactivate?
We deactivated the unit. In fact, we were the worst ComSec unit in the entire division, so they didn't even want the stuff that we left behind.
Well, we were combat engineers. We left every damn thing we had. The only thing we brought back is what we had on our person. And so our unit was deactivated. We were 249th engineers. So now back to what you're saying. You consume this, which I find bizarre. Powdered sulfur. That's just bizarre to me. Because I just can't.
There's another term for it. It's called sublimed, SUBLIMED, sublimed sulfur. And they used to sell it at pharmacies. And sublimed sulfur is an extremely thin powder material. Yes, it can kill you if you do a toxic dose. It's not a healthy idea. It's bad for you in certain ways. But the thing is, I was desperate at the time, and I didn't expect it to work. And I will say this, the very first day that I tried it, I had some of the worst gas a human being could ever have. And I let loose in this comic book store. Oh, my God, my eyes were watering, and I was so embarrassed. I'm like, oh, Lord, these poor people. I've never smelled anything like this in my life. And it was the die-off from all these microbials that I was dealing with as the sulfur killed them. And after
I've heard a lot of crazy shit, but I've never heard anybody say they took freaking sulfur. That's the most bizarre thing I've heard anybody take.
In the old days, you've heard of throwing sulfur in a wound. That's what they do for horses. If a horse stumbles and cuts its leg open, you throw sulfur in the wound, and it's an antibiotic. But it's generally frowned on nowadays because it will cause kidney failure. It'll cause liver failure. I was taking a near lethal dose at that point to kill whatever this was that was inside me at the time. And I never got an answer to what it was I treated, but it was ripping my guts apart. I was literally pooping my intestines. When you're that sick at that point, it's called sloughing. And sloughing is where your intestines shed the layers and the lining inside. And as they're shedding that cilia, that lining in there, it comes out in sheets, little rolled up sheets. So first I thought it was worms. I thought, oh my God, look at the hell that thing is. And then I got my nerve up and I fished it out, and I'm like, what the hell? It rolls out, looks like rolling paper. What in the world have I run into now?
Rolling paper. Hold on, wait a second. So when he fishes out,
don't go too far with that one.
I'm sorry. You said it, not me. But
no, you got to get your nerve up. But when you're dealing with medical problems, you got to get your nerve up, and sometimes you got to look for things. And that's the hard part is you go, okay, this is gross. I got to find out what the hell is this? What is this thing I'm dealing with? And that's when I talked to the doctor, and they told me, yeah, you're sloughing your guts, because with it was also this yellow slime, this gooey, gelatinous yellow slime. And it's the mucosa, the shedding the mucosa, the inside lining of my intestines and everything else. I should not have survived all that. And
wow.
And it was living hell. It was living death. And after coming out of that for years, I never got a good answer for it. And now I'm facing kidney problems and liver problems and all that stuff now. But I've figured out enough of my diet, my situations, that I have a treatment that works for me. And the problem is, for 2 years, I've been trying to tell VA and the others, if nothing else, you can issue a vitamin D supplement to all these people. And if there's nothing lethal about it, and it'll help anyone, especially in our age group. And so I've been trying to push the vitamin D supplement. I'm doing about 4,000 IU a day, and it turned everything around.
Oh, yeah.
Vitamin D.
Well, most of us are vitamin D deficient. Most of us, most Go For vets are. I'm on it. I take it every day.
Well, we're indoors. We're not in the sun. But, yeah, we're at a point now where we're geriatric. But the VA is not even recommending something that has to do with liver function, with liver enzymes, things of that nature. So I've made some of my own medical research breakthroughs here the last 2 years. I've been building a lab. I've been working towards writing my own final report on enzyme function in Go For veterans. And I've been able to prove a variety of things at this point. But the medical community, they're all caught in their little world. And there's a whole other story going on with genetics, the genome, and all that. But I realize we're kind of coming up on the end of the show here, and I've been going on too long.
Well, no, and then maybe that's where we also need to come in and do another part 2 on this. Bring you back and do another part 2, because I'm intrigued.
There's a whole story I can tell y'all about the fight with the Armed Forces Institute of Pathology on the blood samples that just recently, the Department of Defense, the DoD Serum Repository has finally admitted, yeah, we can go back to 1988, 89, genetically sequence that blood that you gave before you went to the war, and we could compare it to now, what a sample looks like now, and we can see what's changed in you genetically then and now. I've been fighting for that one since 2003.
Yeah, I think Jim Brown was talking about that needs to be done. Like, he had his done, because he was on here and he was telling us a lot about that. But what we're going to do now is we're going to go, Kirk, well, I'm definitely bringing you on because I have a lot more questions. But right now we're going to go into the after the show. Okay, so thank y'all for listening this evening. Kirk, thank you. That was very, very informative, man. It was. And I mean, you got my head just wrapping around, especially this, the you have me at eight
Well, we can do
seconds.
this some more. We can do this some more. There's a lot that I can tell you guys. Believe
Yeah.
me, we haven't even touched the surface.
Right, right. And this is where we need to touch the surface on and get this more exposed out there. So right now we're going to go into the after show. Thank y'all for listening, and we will see you next Thursday. Thank you for listening to Go For Side Effects. If you have a story or you would like to share or just come on with any comments or questions, please email me at kevinsimon@goforsideeffects.com.